South Carolina's Attorney General just released a statement on the decision. Alan Wilson said the ruling is a major victory for law enforcement in South Carolina. The state's immigration law is very similar to Arizona's law.
And that Arizona law was a blueprint for a new immigration law here in our state. This morning, Attorney General Alan Wilson issued a statement on today's ruling. He said, quote, "Today's ruling from the United States Supreme Court in the Arizona immigration case contains a major victory for law enforcement in South Carolina. The most important element of South Carolina's law, the ability of law enforcement to verify a suspected illegal alien status upon an authorized lawful detention, was found to be constitutional on its face. The fact remains we need comprehensive legal immigration reform, and that the federal government must step up its border patrol or allow states to combat illegal immigration."
Are saying about this ruling. Angela. Well, immigration experts say the court is sending a clear message to states that this is a federal issue. But officials in South Carolina believe today's ruling is a victory for law enforcement. South Carolina has a stringent immigration policy on the books, one pattern after Arizona's policy, but it's not enforced. South Carolina agreed to wait for guidance from the Supreme Court. Attorney General Alan Wilson says the strength of South Carolina's laws were upheld in today's ruling. He plans to appeal to have South Carolina's stay of immigration laws lifted as soon as possible.
There's still a lot of gray area that we don't know yet. But what is most important for us is that the lawful detention provision in Arizona's law was upheld, and that was a major component of South Carolina's law. That is what I'm focusing on.
The ruling allows local law enforcement officers to attempt to check the immigration status of a person who's been stopped or detained for violating other laws, including moving vehicle violations.
So what does today's ruling mean for us here in South Carolina? Our team coverage continues now with our senior reporter, Jack Kinsey. He's live in Columbia with that part of the story. Our pending law is a lot like Arizona's, Jack.
Yeah, Ben, South Carolina's recently revamped immigration law has been described in some ways as almost a copycat of the Arizona law. There are clearly some similarities. Both, for instance, say it is a violation of state law for a foreigner to fail to carry a registration card or immigration paperwork. That was a provision struck down by the U.S. Supreme Court. But another key feature of the Arizona law upheld by the High Court is nearly identical to one in the South Carolina law, and that requires police to take steps to check the immigration status of anyone they detain if there is reasonable suspicion that person is here illegally. State Attorney General Alan Wilson today called the court's decision on that issue a major victory for South Carolina.
The part involving supporting law enforcement and giving them the ability to make that general check on someone's legal status has been upheld, and we're very excited about that for the law enforcement community.
Court observers and a group that criticized the immigration laws both in Arizona and here in South Carolina say that that provision requiring police to check the status of someone who is detained legally will probably undergo some sort of future legal challenges. For now, Wilson says the state will take steps to petition the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals to end the injunction that was issued by a lower court that prevents that one key provision that was up from being carried out. We're live at the State House. Jack Kinsey, WIS News 10.
Well, that, Alan, let me bring you in. You're the Attorney General of South Carolina. Part of the ruling today obviously makes mention of other states following suit, at least when it comes to police being able to check status of those they arrest. Where does your state stand?
Well, actually, I consider this partial victory for South Carolina. I think everybody here is going to concede there. You know, there are partial victories for both sides. It is a mixed bag. But for South Carolina, and I'll agree with Governor Brewer on this count, that the legal stop provision for law enforcement was a central part of our immigration law. There are only three components of our law that were struck down as being preempted at the district court here in South Carolina. The Supreme Court has addressed those this way. One of them they have struck down. That was the requirement that illegal aliens carry a registration card. There was also the illegal harboring and transporting provision of our law, which the court did not directly address. And then there's the lawful detention and then the subsequent asking of the person's national status or making that determination, which the court unanimously upheld. I consider that a great victory for law enforcement and for law enforcement specifically in South Carolina.
Is it a great victory
I'm
for this country?
overall pleased with the court.
You overall pleased. Let me ask you about this. The National Immigration Law Center, one of its spokespersons says this regarding Arizona. This is not simply about undocumented undocumented immigrants. This is about any person who looks or sounds foreign, skin color. This is a throwback to the days of our country when racial profiling and discrimination was state sanctioned, and that is simply unacceptable in 2012. With the praise that you laid upon Arizona and this decision to be able to stop people and check their quote-unquote status here, how does Arizona ensure that this does not fall into racial profiling? You can send people to sensitivity, you can send to training, but how can you ensure that someone who is a legal citizen of this country is not seen as quote-unquote foreign or as an alien, as you referred, and pulled over and profiled here? How do you protect the people who are here legally who may fit into a quote-unquote suspicious category?
I'd like to answer that.
Go ahead.
I would like to answer that. First off, if you go to the State Department, look under the Bureau of Consular Affairs, there is a notification access manual that they put out to all local, state, and federal law enforcement, which basically strongly recommends and mandates that they actually determine national status pursuant to a lawful detention or stop. You have the State Department already promulgating regulations for law enforcement throughout the country that basically ask law enforcement officials at all levels of our government to actually determine someone's national status when stopping them legally for, say, a traffic infraction. It's already been going on for years. So to claim that there's racial profiling is ridiculous, because we already have the State Department putting out these types of regulations and manuals for all states to follow. So it's absolutely ridiculous.
Raul, is it ridiculous?
Well, I have to address something about local law enforcement. This law actually puts tremendous pressure on local law enforcement officials in Arizona, because part of the law that's already in effect, that was not even challenged, allows any citizen who believes that the law is not being effectively enforced to sue their local police or sheriff. So this opens a tremendous floodgate of potential liability to any citizen who can basically sue their police department and say, you are not pursuing the most effective solutions. So I think it puts law enforcement in a tough spot. I don't think it's necessarily good for local law enforcement.
But is it ridiculous, as the Attorney General?
One thing I have to say that I think he misses is that for Hispanics, for Latino Americans, this is the civil rights issue of our time. And, for us to be, if we're in Arizona, be worried about whether our elderly relatives, whether they have ID or whether they're out alone, without the proper papers, that is totally un-American. It really goes against our American values. And there will be lawsuits by any number of Hispanic advocacy groups.
Michael, Pete Williams also noted in his report that obviously this will go on for an extended period of time for the reasons that Raul pointed out because of lawsuits. But what is your view on the notion that this is seen as ridiculous, that checking someone's status as the Attorney General, and I'm happy that he is on because obviously South Carolina factors into this, Michael, but legally you've worked with many law enforcement personnel throughout your career.
I think that many law enforcement personnel that I've spoken to want this responsibility, that they're concerned about what training do they have that would allow them to make these sort of determinations. Their plates are already full, and frankly, it puts them in a frontline capacity. It puts them in the role of a Customs and Border Patrol agent, which is not their function traditionally on a local level.
John, let me go back to...
That's not true.
Go ahead. I'm sorry, Alan, go ahead.
Well, that last statement wasn't true. And every law enforcement official I talked to in South Carolina wants this. I haven't spoken to anyone that I'm aware of that doesn't want this. And if anyone on this panel has actually read South Carolina's law, I would ask that you do so. Because if you read the law and you find that someone is stopped for, say, speeding or a broken tail light, that the law enforcement official can only hold them for a reasonable time as to make a determination as to what law was broken. And if they have a reasonable suspicion that they're not here legally, they can then call the ICE officials or the federal government. They make the determination as to deportation. But first, let me say this. If you cannot make a determination as to their legal status, or you can't verify that they're here illegally, you still must let them go. You can't keep someone just because they don't have a driver's license. That is forbidden by South Carolina law. So this screaming the sky is falling and this is going to be racial profiling is a complete red herring, and it doesn't address the real issue, which is giving law enforcement the tools that they need to do their job, which the State Department is already allowing.
Attorney General, I can say this. I don't know, and I've not spoken with people in South Carolina, but I personally have interviewed law enforcement personnel out of Arizona who were concerned about their role in this, many of which came out against the legislation in Arizona. That is a fact. Let me bring in Joan Walsh in this conversation to talk about the politics of this, Joan. We're waiting. President Obama is set to speak. We should hear his first live remarks on this. Governor Mitt Romney came out with a very vague statement regarding this. He's being criticized already for not taking a hard line. I'm going to pull up his statement here, but let's let's talk about the politics of it first, Joan.
Sure. Well, you know, I mean, I saw his statement. One can really parse his statement to know exactly where he stands. Every single issue that comes up, Tamron, his response is President Obama has failed to lead. And just as with the enforcement, whether he would overturn the president's decision not to deport young people who were brought here illegally last week, he continues to evade responsibility on these questions and just talk in vague platitudes. And, you know, as I said before, we all would love a comprehensive solution. It is elusive. The president will have certain powers, and Mitt Romney can't really tell us how he would use those powers.
Well, I have the statement, Joan. He said in part, Governor Romney said, I believe that each state has the duty and the right to secure our borders and preserve the rule of law, particularly when the federal government has failed to meet its responsibilities. As candidate Obama, he promised to present an immigration plan during his first year in office, but 4 years later, we are still waiting. And that is part of the governor's statement there. With that said, again, not very specific on what he would like to see on his first day, as the ad points out, with the economy, for example.
Right, and you know, I think that it also ignores the fact that the president, A, can't pass legislation by himself, and B, the other thing that Governor Brewer completely misrepresented. I mean, very controversially, this president has done a lot more to enforce our laws and has deported a lot more people than President Bush did, you know, which is very, very controversial in the Latino community. He's been very aggressive on using the tools that he has. So this notion that he's just letting people wash over the borders and he's not doing anything, he doesn't care. And that he could somehow, with the stroke of a pen or the wave of a wand, pass comprehensive immigration reform is just a misunderstanding of our political system.
And Attorney General, I want to bring you in on it because, again, your state, and correct me if I'm wrong here, you focus in on what I think is an interesting part of the conversation, businesses and their responsibility in all of this. I grew up in the state of Texas, and I went to school with a number of children whose parents were in the country illegally, who were as a workforce in the state of Texas, where businesses, many of them perhaps who donated to different campaigns, seem to escape the eyebrow raising that we get for someone who perhaps is pulled over. You have businesses, the hotel industry, the restaurant industry, that would perhaps in many ways in certain states, as you well know, be decimated if they had the iron fist of some of the actions taken by lawmakers. With all of that said, there seems to be enough blame to go around when you look at Congress with a 13% approval rating, Attorney General, where there needs to be certainly action here, and different states like yours are put in a position perhaps to take action that is seen as right and wrong depending on your perspective.
Well, first off, I want to say this. Our law goes to great lengths to protect people's individual liberties. We go to great lengths to protect people from being profiled against and to make sure that law enforcement is given the appropriate guidance. All we want to do is support the federal government. For years, we have heard that they don't have the resources. Earlier, I think one of the other persons said that President Obama has used every resource that is available to him. That is not entirely accurate, because he has local and state law enforcement, and they're fighting us every step of the way. We don't want to usurp Congress's power under Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. They alone set the uniform laws for naturalization. We just want to help Congress enforce those laws. This is not a patchwork like a quilt, like the president claims, of different laws around the country. We want to support the federal framework for implementing immigration laws, and we want to do it at the state level. What's going on right now is that the federal government, the Congress, can never, ever again punt this thing, saying that they don't have the resources necessary to enforce immigration laws. They now have the states to help them. And it is true, it was said earlier, the Supreme Court could look at it at an as-applied argument down the road to determine if this law is being abused. But I can tell you right now, we have safeguards in our law that will prevent that from happening.